Welcome to Media Bites. This is Random Rob.
This was Truman's America, and many Americans today regard it as a golden age of their civilization. But for Qutb, he saw a sinister side in this. All around him was crassness, corruption, vulgarity, talk centered on movie stars and automobile prices. He was also very concerned that the inhabitants of Greeley spent a lot of time in lawn care, pruning their hedges, cutting their lawns. This, for Qutb, was indicative of the selfish and materialistic aspect of American life. Americans lived these isolated lives surrounded by their lawns. They lusted after material goods. And this, says Qutb quite succinctly, is the taste of America.
The Power of Nightmares was a 3-hour documentary produced for the BBC in 2004 by Stephen Lambert and was written, directed, and narrated by Adam Curtis. Curtis is a documentary filmmaker, primarily known in the UK for his 2002 documentary The Century of the Self, which examines the role that Freudian and post-Freudian psychology has played in mass media's influence on individualism in society. Individualism is also studied in The Power of Nightmares, as it examines the political philosophy and rise of both the radical Islamist movements, centered in and around Egypt and Afghanistan, and the neoconservative political movement in the United States. The documentary postulates that the political philosophy of both groups has magnified and exaggerated the impact of the other, to the extent that it has created and reinforced a climate of fear that benefits people in power, but is in fact largely imaginary. Clearly, this position will fall outside of the narratives that come from American corporate media, and because it examines the September 11th attacks, this documentary has been perhaps unfairly compared or lumped in with works such as Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11 or the indie YouTube documentary Loose Change. However, I don't find The Power of Nightmares to be nearly as socially incendiary as either of the latter films. Rather, its points to me are so simple and obvious that I find them far more compelling than the more fanciful and elaborate conspiracy theories that exploded in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks and still proliferate on the internet. In Episode 1, the origin of the modern radical Islamist movement are traced back to Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian civil servant who comes to America in the 1950s to examine how modern American high schools operate. During his stay, Qutb became convinced that Americans were so consumed by the pursuit of consumerism and personal freedoms that they had lost their spiritual guidance, and therefore their morality. Fearing that the Egyptian government led by General Abdel Nasser would embrace Western ideology, Qutb joined and became a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamic movement opposed to Nasser's secular government. When Nasser had the Brotherhood rounded up and tortured with the help of the CIA, Qutb had a heart attack and an epiphany. He realized that this single-minded state of chasing freedom not only leads to a forced retreat from spirituality, but also brings out barbarism and violence, and that these ideas and ideology are infectious and terminal. He called this state of spiritual blindness Jahiliyyah. Qutb was put to death in 1966 by Nasser, but his idea of Jahiliyyah would lead to the idea of exterminating people for being infected with it, which would be popularized by Ayman al-Zawahiri, who would lead a group that assassinates Egyptian President Anwar Sadat in 1981. When the public did not side with al-Zawahiri and left him in jail, he realized, as Qutb had, that Jahiliyyah was not only spreading through the West, but was infecting Islam itself.
The sense is that Jahiliyyah is so dangerous now because it not only is advanced by Western powers, but Muslims, this is like a charge of false consciousness, Muslims have become infected with this Jahiliyyah. So now the threat to Islam is also from within. It's from without and within. It's the state of emergency because Jahiliyyah is a condition that pervades everything and everybody. It's even infected our powers of imagination. We don't even know that we're sick, that we now worship materialism and the self and individual truths over the real truths. So it's an incredible sense of epic confrontation where Islam is being insulted on all fronts, from within, from without, culturally, militarily, economically, politically. And under those circumstances, any way of fighting it becomes justified and legitimate. And in fact has a kind of existential weight because somehow it's doing God's will on earth.
Zawahiri came to the conclusion that Muslims needed a startling example of power to show them what they needed to do. And it's here that the ideological seeds of the 9/11 attacks are planted. Meanwhile, in the US, roughly around the same time Qutb is having his personal revelation, a political professor at Chicago University, Leo Strauss, came to a rather similar conclusion about society. That individual freedom led to questioning the shared values of society, which tore it apart, creating social chaos. It was up to those in power to provide examples for people to follow, to create and reinforce a moral framework and mission statement for society. Whether or not these ideas were true didn't matter. The results would justify the means. Strauss's theories would become the shared basis of the neoconservative political movement in the United States, attracting men like Paul Wolfowitz, William Kristol, and Donald Rumsfeld, among others. These men felt that liberal reforms were breaking their country, that this was evidenced by the social unrest that grew out of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, and that these like-minded men had a special mission to return America to its rightful place as a heroic, guardian nation that leads the free world. Curtis, by focusing singularly on the power struggle between these two thematically similar ideologies, paints a compelling picture that racial and nationalist fears have been exploited on both sides, that the threat level has no ceiling, and that the maintenance of the threat is the goal of those in power, that the cost are tragedies like the September 11th attacks, and ongoing military engagements with confusing objectives. The documentary itself is done in a very light, almost tabloid style, loaded with archive footage and some unusual background music, including Skinny Puppy, and some unused tracks from John Carpenter's The Thing, which musically refers back to the elusive, shape-changing nature of the War on Terror. I could spend a lot of time talking about this documentary, but I'd much rather you seek it out. Listen to what it has to say and draw your own conclusions. It's a powerful piece, but its focus is much more strictly kept on media's effect on people, and how politics has seemingly abandoned social progress in favor of a justified police state mentality, not just in the US, but throughout the industrial world. In my opinion, the message Curtis is sending really can't be overstated. It's time to start questioning who and what we are actually fighting, and what the War on Terror is really about. There are versions of this DVD available in the US, but they seem to have been burned on DVD-Rs by individuals promoting 9/11 truth groups. And I can't comment on their quality, but I do know that they are not legally owned. Since the BBC released a statement that there are no plans to release these documentaries due to licensing issues because of the various media content from the US in them. I also noticed that the DVDs from Amazon don't have any SKU or ISBN numbers or copyright info printed on the discs or sleeves. I'm guessing these are privately burned and are being sold for personal profit. Since this documentary was made for public television and was shown freely, I would suggest, rather than sending $20 or so to someone for a DVD-R, you should simply seek it out on YouTube or some other free source, or from a torrent site, as this work was supposed to be freely available for public viewing. To me, sharing falls under that rubric. I may go ahead and contact Curtis and the BBC personally and see if I can post the documentary here. We'll see. Once again, thanks for spending some time at Media Bites. This is Random Rob. If you enjoyed this video, please like it on the YouTube page and join Media Bites on Facebook. There's a link listed below. Thanks again, friends, and we'll see you next time.